What do you see the next decade has in store for the child-free and childless, not by choice communities?
Next decade. Well, this next decade or two is going to be just unbelievable because the climate issues, I think, are really going to be driving a lot of things. According to scientists, fertility is going to be down to next to zero in the middle of the century. I mean, I think that the number of childless people is going to go through the roof, and I think the demands on us to reduce our consumption is going to be humongous. We're really going to have to change the way we do just about everything. In that, I think there is an opportunity, but for the childless community, we're only going to grow. I do think that, well, what I would like to see, because I know spiral dynamics and I know that we're going to go through this cultural transformation, I would love to see more child free and childless people become a part of that, finding a place within the conversation about what our cultures need to become.
Welcome to the Child Free Wealth Podcast, hosted by Bree and Dr. J, Certified Financial Planner. Here we discuss life and finances as it relates to being child-free. This podcast is for educational and entertainment purposes only. Please consult your advisor before implementing any ideas heard on this podcast.
Hey, Child Free Wealth listeners. Today we're going to do something a little different. We're going to go into the childless world. We're going to talk about the process and childless, not by choice, and where that goes. And we've done some of this before. If you've listened to our episodes before, Katie Seppi, you're familiar with some of this discussion. Today I have Maria Hill here, who is just an awesome resource on what is this like to have a life of childless, not by choice, and how does it work, and what's the grieving process, and where does it fit in, like all these moving parts. And what I love is she talks about joy. And if you listen to the podcast, I talk about how do we optimize for the most joy and how do we do that. And we're going to dive in there. It's going to be a little different than our normal, but that's okay because we want to make sure we're serving everybody who doesn't have kids, no matter how they got there. Maria, thanks for joining me on the podcast.
Thank you for having me. I greatly appreciate it.
Introduce yourself. Kind of like tell us. You have so many things going on, like can't even do it justice. So tell me about you and who you are.
Okay. I grew up in New England, greater Boston area, and I come from an ultra right-wing conservative family, and they had expected me to move into the typical traditional role, and I knew early on it wasn't for me. And I remember I went out into the world, and it was about the time when we were liberalizing divorces. And I saw all these women and their children being basically thrown out and onto the streets, basically with no support, because we didn't have child support then. And I think it probably took a couple of decades. And it scared me half to death. It scared me half to death that I saw in my family that women who were dependent really had no voice. And then I saw that going on. I went to Tufts and got a bachelor's degree, but I was only allowed to study languages. And legal age meant I didn't get to choose. I was working in the healthcare system. I worked at Children's Hospital in Boston and in a variety of roles. And I decided I'd better get an MBA because I wanted to put a floor underneath myself, because we used to talk about where women worked as being the pink ghetto. And that I just didn't know how to survive in a world like this. I started going nights. It took me a decade, but I got my MBA. And then I transitioned into the computer industry, and I ended up working at IBM for a while. IBM was wonderful for women. There was no harassment. It was just the most 400,000 people. People were able to communicate all over the world together. There was no harassment of anyone based on their sex or their nationality, their race. There was none of that allowed. And it was just such a beautiful environment. I'd go to work, and I wouldn't worry about anyone getting in my way. And that was a real treat. Anyway, there were a lot of things going on in my life. I married someone with children, and unfortunately he had custody, but then that changed. And we ended up with these very big legal battles with his ex-wife, because in Massachusetts, there was any change in circumstance, someone could take you to court in the family court. And we ended up with huge 6-figure legal bills from all of that. I mean, it was quite nasty. It took us a long time to get through that. And that really took our possibility of having children away. So none of this was anything I had anticipated. And I thought, wow, that was a lot of loss. And anyway, as we worked our way through paying all of that, and then we had moved quite a bit. buying houses, fixing them up, and selling them in addition to working, all the things you do. And so as we got through that process, I had always wanted to go to art school, and I had the opportunity to go to art school in Virginia, which is where we were living, because it was a very inexpensive state school that was very good. So I took the opportunity and gave myself space to do something different. And when I got through, I said, well, I've got to earn a living. So I decided to go work online, trying to help people like me who are highly sensitive and empaths. And that's how I got started working online. And I created Sensitive Evolution. And as a big library, I wrote the book, The Emerging Sensitive. My focus is on culture and sensitivity and the times we're living in, because a lot of people who are sensitive get caught up in some of the, well, you don't have to be sensitive to get caught up, but when you're sensitive, you need to have a way of discerning what's going on around you. And so I use the cultural systems of spiral dynamics to teach sensitive people about different cultural systems, what they're about, what the possibilities are, where they're going to be toxic, where they add value, so they can be more discerning and therefore more effective in the world, because a lot of sensitive people hold back because they don't know how to relate. So anyway, that has been an important part of my work. It has evolved into the Magic of Joy program. I did have a 1-year emerging sensitive program I offered where I went into it in great depth, but I've now turned it into the Magic of Joy program. And what I do is I provide the cultural piece. I help people with the energy piece so that they release the energies they're holding on to. I train them to understand this concept of the loyal soldier, which is an internal part of us that keeps us loyal and stuck in the past. And then I've created a joy practice, which is a foundation for moving out of the existing approach to life, which is very fear-based, into a way of living, actually just gets rid of all of that. So it's a totally new foundation based on being caring, constructive, and serving the common good. And that just defines your energetic space, your focus, your intention, your investments in a very different way. And then with the gratitude practice and other tools, you're able to just change the way you live, not only for yourself, but also for other people.
Yeah, and we'll use different language, and we talk about life planning and the challenge of the standard life script and writing your own script and how does that relate and what's your impact. And we're really going to the same type of thing. We're just using a different set of language to get there. Is that fair?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yes. You do have to reconsider what you invest your time and energy into. And that does mean if you're childless, you're basically taken out of the traditional, I call it a traditional script. I don't know, that might be too narrow a way of framing it, but it certainly is out of what is the norm. And you have to find a different story for yourself. And that's not easy to do.
It is, and now, but I'm reflecting back to your start of your conversation, and you were talking a lot about the way you were raised and the role of women at the time and women's rights. And we're here, I think it's the 51st anniversary of Roe, and it's now overturned. And I'm in Deep South, and I'm like, oh, have we really made progress? Like there's like this cultural thing, and now I'm running a child-free financial firm, and by the way, I'll use terms child-free and childless in different terminology, and we can come back to that. But I'm running a child-free financial firm in the Deep South, and all the judgments and the people praying for my soul, and I don't have it the same as women. I'll be honest with that, but even as a man, and I'm like, wow, maybe we haven't come as far as like some of us. Am I wrong on that, or like is it? I mean, like I was literally listening to your story. I'm like, it's repeating itself.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting problem because I think the world opening up. I mean, I see capitalism actually helped us open up as a society because it kept creating different lifestyles for different markets in order to expand. And so it's actually created this opening up process. But socially, particularly those who are more religiously anchored, have been resisting this opening up. So we have this conflict between the economic system and between the social anchors. And there is this fight going on. And I do think that I've thought about this quite a bit, that one of the reasons we're having so many fights right now, and not just here in the United States, but when you open up and you create greater acceptance for more people and different kinds of people and different ways of living, you lose the social club of rejection. So acceptance actually takes power away from those who are more hierarchical and authoritarian, and they don't exactly like that. And I find, in my experience anyway, that people who are quite authoritarian often aren't as up to the task of our complex world. And they like to rely on other people, but they also then want to have the power and the control. That doesn't really work. And so if you're the one out there doing the work, eventually you get tired of people who don't do the work trying to tell you what to do all the time when they're often misguided, and it doesn't sit too well. And we have so many people now trying to do this work of change, raising our consciousness and raising our skills. Joanna Macy calls it the great turning, and I think it is. And from a spiral dynamics standpoint, we are at the end of the narrative of survival. If you understand I don't know if you've ever experienced any of the writings around spiral dynamics, but it goes through all the different cultural systems and the various steps we have taken to get where we are. It's really quite interesting as a story, but we're at the end of that. We're at the point where our survival-oriented activity is actually hurting us, and we have to change. But we have this wonderful foundation of institutions, skills, just wonderful what's been created. And we now have to shift from survival into what I think will be a thriving agenda. And thriving is very different because you're not shooting yourself in the foot with short-sighted strategies. You have to honor the long-term needs of the earth to regenerate, for instance, for us to take care of our health. It's much more health focused, and you protect the health of people and nature, etc. And so it's a very different way of operating. And I think we have no choice. And so, but that does mean a world where we collaborate. We have to get together and say, okay, this is what we need to protect our health. This is what we all have to do. And we all have to work together. And a lot of people don't like that working together stuff.
Oh, that's true. And we can also talk about systematic biases and things that because I work in the financial world, I fight day in, day out. And I do two things. I talk to child-free and childless folks about their finances, but I talk to financial people about people who don't have kids and really saying, what is it like? And they struggle. Let's just be honest. They struggle to see that we're a large population and we have a different way of living and different finances. And one of the debates I've been having with financial planners, and I'm going to bring you into this and see what you think,
okay,
is how much it matters to your life and financial plan, whether it was your choice or not. And where I have some issues with this is often when people are not part of our child-free, childless community, when they're asking questions, it's not really with a positive intent. Let's just be honest with that. They're asking, why did you do that? Why not? Why? They're questioning things that my take on it is once you've gotten to a point where you've decided I'm never having kids, whether it's by choice or not, your whole life and financial plan changes. How you got there doesn't impact your finances, but it is part of your own personal growth. What I'm arguing is financial planners, that's not your problem to deal, to work through. There are others that are skilled at helping through the grieving process and all that. So in some cases, it almost matters in some cases, but not in others, how you got there. And how do you separate that? How do you explain to people outside the community? How do you work with people that are child-free or childless and understanding those by choice and not?
Yeah, I think that's a very challenging question because I think there is this idea that there's something wrong with you. Perhaps you may not be taken quite as seriously as a client if you're working with a financial professional. You may be treated as if you're not as serious a person about your life because you aren't, even though there are so many things that are contributing to people becoming childless. Certainly I know more about the childless not by choice community. In my case, it was a lot of the social changes and family considerations. But for some people, it's health. Some people just don't find a partner because women have been going through this change. And a lot of men have not met them where they are. You've got all these different reasons. And I think a lot of people have this kind of fixed, narrow idea about life. And I don't know how you exactly reach them, but they certainly have an obligation as a professional. And isn't there a fiduciary responsibility to at least try to understand the customer and where they're at? If it was a financial professional talking to me, I would be saying, hey, wait a minute here. I can't fit in this box for a lot of reasons. They're good reasons. And I don't really need your approval, but I do need for you to be able to meet me where I am and help me. And if you're not able to do that, maybe I need to be going elsewhere.
Yeah, and I'm kind of laughing because I mean, the example I use, I had somebody, I went to buy software for my company, and they said, "Who do you serve?" I said, "I serve child-free folks." And they go, "Oh, you hate kids." I'm like, "All right, come on." Like, and we've been as a company having this debate of, do all of our child-free wealth specialists, as we call them, our financial planners, have to be child-free or childless?
Oh, that's an interesting question.
And my current take on it is, I ask everyone they're hired, why do you want to serve the child-free community? That's the question I'm asking. I don't know that I care as much, whether or not you have kids as much, but why do you want to serve this specific community? And it's been enlightening, because
Really,
most people
I'd
don't have
love
an
to
answer.
hear.
If you have no answer, then I'm not going to interview you. Like, just like, if you're like, I want a job, that's why I want no. But then I have these other folks going, hey, I've had this struggle. I've been there. And I'm like, there's just something to having gone through the process, whether it's choice or not by choice, gone through the thought process, understand the difference, to the point where I'm like, how do I teach people that haven't been through it how to embrace us? So the LGBT community talks about having allies. What are our allies to the child-free or childless community? And how do we do this? And the discussion I'm having with the financial world, let's be real, it's old, pale, and stale. Okay, it's old white men. And I can judge them. I'm getting on the old side too, and I'm a white male. They haven't had a new thought in decades. And we're over here on this innovation side, and I'm like, I don't know. Maybe we just need our own people to serve our own people, and or how do we build ally? What are your thoughts on that? Because you're working, and we also even get into finer details of, like, do we need childless folks to serve childless folks, child-free folks to serve, and how do we find that? And I don't know. I don't know what the right answer is.
Yeah, I think it is. I think at a minimum, if I were in your shoes, I would want people who have been through some very, very serious grief and serious loss. Because if you've gone through something that's serious, it does change you. I mean, for people who are like me, everything gets thrown on the table, everything has to be rethought, every assumption has to be questioned. People who have lived in a place where they've had to question a lot of assumptions probably are people who have the capacity and the empathy to work with people who are childless, whether it's child free or childless, not by choice. So I might look for people who have lost a child, might be really good for this kind of work. And there are people like that out there. People who have been through some very serious death in their family or something like that, because it is kind of a death. You do lose, for me anyway, it's been a very serious death in terms of family in a way, because I don't have any real connection anymore. There is no real common ground in a lot of ways. Because once you're in those older ways of being, if you're someone that has no choice but to move into new ways of being, you do find that the bridge goes away, it almost collapses, and so you just have to accept that. But you need someone who has been through that reckoning. And I think there is a very serious reckoning. That's kind of where I would look. People with a lot of grief experience or experienced serious loss, but also processed it and come out the other end. Because you can't just stay stuck there. Now, some people will, but because it is a hard thing to go through. And I certainly empathize if someone has trouble actually getting through it based on the circumstances. That may make sense, but those are the things that I would be looking for.
Yeah, and the way I say it is, we do life and financial planning. Our term, we call it child-free wealth, because it's really hard to say people who don't have kids and don't plan on having kids wealth. Like, we had to pick a term, and none of the terms are perfect. But
That's
my
fine.
argument is, if you're in the childless community and you're still going through the grieving process, or you're still trying to conceive, or you're not sure, don't come to a new life yet. And I'm not saying it's better or worse. I'm just saying it's different. You need to have gone through the process before you're like, okay, what's next? Is that fair?
Yes, absolutely. Your energy is directed towards that pain when you're still in the early stages or going through it. And there comes a point where you start to release yourself from the old life. It really is a process, and it can be a very long one. And it can take decades. You have to allow yourself the space for that. I do think that people so I do the Age of the Queen webinars, and we're trying to show people that, and it could be at any stage of the grieving process, but that there's something waiting for them, that there's something that happens with you internally that helps you reshape your life, that you actually become a different person. And we talk about what that's like, that process, and who do we become? What kinds of things do we let go of? Because I think that, I mean, for me personally, there are a lot of things that I just won't tolerate that maybe I thought were, things I had to put up with in the past. And I think that's true. You become more serious in some ways about what you put your time and energy into. And that's a good outcome of this journey. I try to show people that, yes, there are really positive possibilities at the end of this, because you can get lost in the grieving process. And I think that it can't be a bad thing for them to realize that financially there's also possibilities for them at the end of this process. They may not be ready for the new life. Putting out some seeds for them to chew on isn't a bad thing.
Yeah, and we actually tracked it. We have a lot of folks that we do our introductory meetings. We call them consultations, and a lot of them end up in tears. And we were trying to figure out why. And what we found was it was the first time they felt like they were heard, like somebody actually understood where they were coming from. And I dove deeper, and I'm a researcher by nature. I got to keep asking questions. And what I found is those that are coming from the not by choice side, I can usually tell if they're ready or not for the next conversation, which may or may not be part of the grieving process. But like, you get to that acceptance period in the grief process, and then you need like the now what? Like, I've been leading the standard script forever, and I've left it, and I don't know if there's a one answer on that, but I often kind of will go to, well, what do you want your life to look like? And they go, I don't know. Like, I'll ask people, what do you want to be when you grow up? Which has nothing to do with age. And they're like, what do you want to be? And they're like, well, I've always wanted to. I'm like, understood. That is where you came from. Where do you want to go? And my take on it is you have to respect the grieving process, respect what they've gone through. And in some cases, you need to give them a little shove towards the other side.
Yeah.
And how do you find that balance between, being empathetic, working with them, and going, okay, you need that little friendly kick in the butt to move you forward?
Yeah, I think that's it can be a challenge because it can feel a little confronting. When I'm working with people and they're usually childless and it may be child free, I always talk about baby steps. And so one of the reasons I do the 3 C's in my joy practice is because it's providing them with a new foundation. And so they need a new foundation, because if you're going for the now what, and all you're looking at is this system that is so pronatalist and so high in consumption, and so many, particularly the women, not necessarily the men, they may not necessarily have the economic resources, and that can be a great fear for them. They may not look out in the world and see something that's really attractive to them as a place to go. It's almost like you need to take a step back from the whole world and create a new kind of foundation. And I always tell people to simplify, and get your basic needs under control, because that will open you up to what comes next for you. I think there are baby steps you can take. There are some shifts you can make. And maybe you want to offer a process for people to go through. So here are some steps for you to start thinking about that. Do everything on baby steps. And then, you may eventually have them ready to move into doing something more, tackle the financial issues in a more aggressive way.
It's interesting because you and I use different language. We get almost exact same place. So, the slogan we're using, so my next book's coming out. It's called The Childfree Guide to Life and Money. And we're saying it's make your finances simple so your life can be amazing.
Oh, I love
which
that.
Which is almost exactly what you just said. We're on the same page. I will tell you, though, our program is called the 8 No Baby Steps, because we're making fun of baby steps.
That's cool.
But we're, just having a little fun with it. You got to do the marketing thing. But I think one of the challenges is we all need to support each other.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like over time there's been some arbitrary lines between child-free, childless, the terms, and I'm more kind of like open arms. We're all in this together. Where are you at on that?
I think you're right. I do think that in the childless not by choice community, that many people feel they need a protected time and space for their grieving process, and that they may feel treated like they're inferior because they're not all, yay, life is wonderful, I'm child free. And so there is that. But I think that as more and more people go through the grieving process, I think those lines are going to start to, in other words, you'll have that childless, not by choice, grieving community, and then you'll have the community of people who have worked their way through it and can work with others. So I think that, this is a fairly recent process. And so I think, eventually, it'll come together more. And I think that's a good thing. But I do think you have to really get through a lot of the grieving before you're ready for that. I really don't care if someone is child free or childless not by choice. I mean, for me at this point, I just don't care. It's no big deal.
When I was naming the company, Katie said we was working with me on it. We ended up working on terms because we got a search engine optimization and how does that work and all. And we're like, okay, we called it for people that are child free and permanently childless, as kind of like a broad. I was like that. But the thing Katie said, and she was working on it at the time, and I haven't talked to her in a little bit. I hope she gets there. She's like, we need to find a word that doesn't include the word child in it. That is our community.
That's interesting.
Because we're actually basing ourselves on whether or not we do or don't have something that is not our identity. And I love that concept. By the way, I have no clue how to fix it. Like that's like somebody else's problem. But I'm like, the language we have is just challenging some of our own growth and some of our own community. And, we don't have great data on it, and percentages and numbers. But we're all kind of going through a non-standard life path. Let's call it that.
Ooh, yes.
And that means in the end, we end up in a different place. And one of the ones I've been working on recently, and I've spent almost 2 years working on this, is who makes decisions for us when we get older, because the whole system is based on next of kin. And we have a product we're actually announcing later this year on that we'll be able to be people's medical power attorney, financial power attorney, and executor and all that. But somebody had asked me, well, if the whole medical and healthcare system, financial, all assumes you have next of kin, maybe we should fix that system. I'm like, yes, but until it does.
That's a big project.
That was where you're talking about the thriving versus, surviving and all. It's these basic assumptions that we have to challenge. And how do we build an infrastructure to support each other so that, the analogy I use, my wife and I, we get in a car crash. Who's going to make medical decisions for us? Who's going to pay our bills? Who's going to let our dog out? Those sound like simple questions, but those are really hard.
Yes, they are.
And it's one of those, like, in the childless not by choice community, you had an answer because you had a picture, you had a life, you thought that was going to answer it. And now you don't. And that who's going to take care of you when you're older, the safety nets, all that, it just starts becoming a challenge. Is that fair?
I think it's very fair. I think, you look at things like LegalZoom, they have living wills and all sorts of different kinds of things. That actually wouldn't be a bad service for the childless and child-free community to have a group of people who serve in the capacity of helping people prepare that and then are available when something does happen. And so that might be an interesting adjunct to what you do if you're not already started down that path.
That's where we're going. I'm not so worried about we're not going to be your lawyer filling out paperwork. But the question is, like, who's your emergency contact? Like, who do you call? Who does the hospital call? And it just becomes those issues. But so you've worked through this whole process. You've seen decades of, I'm going to call it progress in quotes. What do you see the next decade has in store for the child-free and childless, not by choice communities?
Next decade. Well, this next decade or two is going to be just unbelievable because the climate issues, I think, are really going to be driving a lot of things. According to scientists, fertility is going to be down to next to zero in the middle of the century. I mean, I think that the number of childless people is going to go through the roof, and I think the demands on us to reduce our consumption is going to be humongous. We're really going to have to change the way we do just about everything. In that, I think there is an opportunity, but for the childless community, we're only going to grow. I do think that, well, what I would like to see, because I know spiral dynamics and I know that we're going to go through this cultural transformation, I would love to see more child-free and childless people become a part of that, finding a place within the conversation about what our cultures need to become. And I always refer people to resilience.org because that's a great resource for the conversation that's going on already. And I think we may have a commons movement. I think the EU is already looking into that. There is a commons organization, at least one, that's already working on creating a legal framework for a commons. So there's a lot of stuff going on. There's non-human rights projects. That's going to change things. There's a biologist by the name of Andreas Weber who is looking at trying to change science so it isn't materialistically oriented, it's aliveness oriented. And he wants all institutions to be supporting aliveness. And that's very much a thriving oriented type of perspective. So I would love to see the childless and the child-free community start to shift towards focusing how do we go about shaping this new culture? And it definitely is going to have to be one that's very kind to the childless and the child-free communities. Not getting left out this time.
Yeah, but I'm also deep here in the South and going, I don't, that's a long road to hoe. Like it. Somebody, I did one in another podcast, and afterwards we were talking, just conversing, and they said, why hasn't the child-free and childless community become a huge voting bloc? If it's 25% of the US, because that's where the numbers are, kind of like something like 20% or so, like literally if we're all together, like you can make change pretty quick. And I was like,
that's an interesting question.
I had never thought of it. I don't like to get in the politics game because it feels like you can't win. But I was like, wow, that is a good question. And by the way, I think some of it is we're fragmented within our own community. But I was like, if so we go to Japan and about 1/3 are child free or childless. We go somewhere 20-30%, something like that of the world is child free, childless in different populations. That's a huge political, cultural block that could make changes. I don't know. Maybe that's one of those projects I'll put on your list, to lead the charge and set it up. But
well, I think kind of news network focused on the childless community and issues, and start maybe having conversations beyond just the subject of family. Something like that might be interesting. Maybe just to mobilize people, but
I had a conversation with them the other day, and we were saying, what would be great is a nonprofit, an AARP for child-free and childless folks. Like now that's kind of cool because we could actually get some deals on. We were looking at long-term care insurance. If we have a group, we can get a lower price. Like we're like, wow. But where I'm going is, I'm trying to say, all right, you gave us 50 years of history, and I went, we haven't moved that much in those 50 years. I don't want to go another 50 years and go, oh, we didn't make much movement. And that's the hard part is. We all have our own personal grief, our own personal struggles, our own personal things. If we change the environment, it'd be easier for us to make those personal changes. We'd feel supported. We would have a group. I don't know. You're doing a lot of cool stuff with the childless community, the childless collective, and these programs. And, we all just need to have the conversation.
True. I do think that part of the fight going on right now is because actually we have accomplished a lot. And I think in some ways it may be the last stand of the authoritarian systems. I know it may be hard to think of it that way because the fights are pretty ugly. But certainly the numbers in the United States, just from a political standpoint, show that really more people are aligned with a more open society than closed. And I understand your feelings about the Deep South. I live in Virginia, and that's about as south as I want to go because I am I'm very uncomfortable with the right wing, and the Civil War lives on in the South. very much a part of their grievance structure, and they have a big grievance thing going on. Anyway, I can't help but wonder whether or not this is part of this last stand against, the opening up of the world. Certainly in terms of our ability to be who we are, to make choices for ourselves. Self-determination is supposed to be part of democracy, but authoritarian systems are not in favor of self-determination. They will block it every chance they get. We're at that point where we have to make a decision. I think I'm fairly optimistic about it, but I do think it's kind of touch and go. And I think that we as a country here in the United States need to take a hard look at the way we structure things so that we're not backsliding. Because I don't think people really understood how relentless and ruthless those who are authoritarian are. I think people had this veneer of, I'm really a nice guy. You see these people who are very right-wing doing this. I'm really a nice guy. Aw, shucks, kind of thing. And it isn't true. And I think we're having a wake-up call around that. And hopefully people are getting the message. I think there's enough talk about what authoritarianism is in the media now that I think people are beginning to grasp that. That is a step towards, actually getting to a place where we are going to be able to have a world where we have more self-determination. So, yeah, I know we haven't gone too far in 50 years. I was shocked at the attempts to push us back, successful attempts over the past. Really shocked that would happen. But anyway, we have some work to do.
I don't know. I think I'm done being shocked. I'm just kind of like, and I don't know, 10 years from now, we might look back at a period differently. But so where can we find you? If we want to hear more about what you're doing and, see the work you're doing, where can we?
Well, my main website is mariaehill.com. I have my information of the Queen webinars there, my joy practice, and sensitive evolution, my big main website for sensitive people. So you can find all of that there. And you can find me on Facebook and on Instagram as well. And I'm also a part of the Gateway community. Well, it's now known as the Childless Collective. And so I'm there. I support the women who are sensitive in that community. I have my subgroup there. And I'm also a part of World Childless Week. I'm an ambassador for that. And I am also on Jody Day's fireside chats that she does every quarter. So you can find me in any number of those places.
Well, great. Well, thanks for joining me. And this has been enlightening. And let's hope for the future.
Yes, we cross our fingers.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the show, please consider leaving a rating or review. We'd love to keep the conversation going. Follow Childfree Wealth on social media or email us at podcast@childfreewealth.com. If you're interested in working together, learn more by visiting our website, www.childfreewealth.com. We'll see you next time.